We're really grateful to have Joe Love come along from the Iona Community to lead us in this session on worship and teaching. So Jo's from Glasgow. She's joining us from Glasgow this evening, I assume, or at least north of the border, which gives me a good opportunity just to speak to you for a minute before I introduce her about COP26. Great. So yeah, I just wanted to draw your attention briefly to the Global Day of Action, which is taking place on Saturday, the 6th of November. Christian Aid is calling on churches and its supporters to join with faith communities and people from around the world who will be marching together for climate justice on Saturday the 6th. And you can find all the details on the Christian Aid website. You can join on a virtual global march. So it would be great if you could share this with your churches and your communities, and do think about taking part in this in some way. So I think actually that the Iona Community, I'm right in saying that the Iona Community are marching in Glasgow as part of that Day of Action on the 6th. So I'd like to introduce Jo to you now in her own words. For the past 12 years, Jo has been one of the Wild Goose Resource Group, who exists to enable and encourage greater creativity and participation in our forms of worship and our practices of living as people of faith. When she needs her own replenishing, you'll find her communing with woodland trees or beachcombing or playing in her art room. In times of prayer, she's currently finding deep resonance in calling on God as our faithful keeper. So thank you so much for coming along and joining us this evening and for leading us, and welcome, Jo. I'll hand over to you now.
Good evening, friends, and thank you, Eileen, for your welcome. And it's a delight to be with you in this strange world of virtual connection. And I haven't had much chance to get to know who you all are and where you're coming from in your church life and your own lives. But I hope that there'll be something for everyone tonight in these ideas as we think about creative ways to worship around environmental themes. So we're going to begin with just a short devotion with some opening responses, which I will put up on the screen. And I just invite you to say the words in the bold and the green. And if you're muted or unmuted, whether we hear each other a bit or not, you choose. So let's pray. In the beginning, God made the world.
Made it and mothered it, shaped it and fathered it, filled it with seeds and with signs of fertility, filled it with life and with endless ability.
All that is green, blue, deep and growing. God
is the hand that created you.
All that is tender, firm, fragrant and curious. God
is the hand that created you.
All that crawls, flies, swims, walks, or is motionless. God
is the hand that created you.
All that speaks, sings, laughs, cries, or keeps silence.
God is the hand that created you.
All that suffers, stumbles, lacks, or longs for an end.
God is the hand that created you.
The world belongs to God.
The earth and all its people.
Few questions to get us on our way. How well do you know the ecosystem you live within? If the trees or birds of your neighborhood could talk, what would they say about you as part of their habitat? What kind of creaturely presence are you? where do you fit in? How connected are you to the other living beings around you and the land on which you daily walk? How has the world of nature blessed you? And how have you been a blessing in return? What have you learned about God that perhaps only an experience of wild outdoor solitude could have taught you? Or that only paying close up attention to some tiny flower or insect could have taught you? What if we explored questions like these in church? What other questions would you like to explore about the fragile, resilient, colourful, breathtaking gift of God that is creation? Our primal sacred story right at the start of the Bible bears witness to the world being very good. A gift of love from God who is very creative. And one way in to letting our God-given creativity show up more expansively in our worship might be to simply open up deeper conversations. Conversations that go a bit deeper than your average after-service coffee time. So let's dive in right now to exactly some of that. In a moment, you'll be invited into a breakout room, and there I invite you to share some real stories of connection and disconnection between you and the rest of creation. So what are your real life examples of being connected and being disconnected somehow from the natural world around you, whether on your doorstep or further away? And then just touch a little on this second question. How does the corporate worship you participate in regularly, how does that experience of corporate worship affect those connections and disconnections? Okay, so just some real stories about being connected and disconnected from the natural world. And how does your worship time strengthen or weaken those connections, disconnections? in the downpour through the hours of this autumn night. While we're here in this virtual world, static and screen bound, which is not a patch on being out there in the dark beside a solid trunk being kissed by the rain, is it? A few years ago, I heard the wisdom of a theology tutor at Glasgow University, Heather Walton, speaking of how, in contrast to what Jesus was really about, Christianity has not given us a healthy way to relate to physical things and physical reality. We've somehow got the idea that to be pure in soul or pure in spirit means to be separated from stuff, physical stuff. We have suffered for this, and the earth has suffered, not from our over love of what is material, but from our under love of what is material. In fact, to have rich relationships with objects, physical things, what we can touch and hold, living bodies, including our own body, to have rich relationships with materiality is actually to have rich lives. So arguably, worship that will save us, worship that will save the earth, needs to be more physical, more embodied than our traditional patterns have tended to be. And that's especially a need as we tackle both the climate crisis and the COVID crisis. Whenever human populations are in mourning or transition, suffering displacement or dislocation of any kind, there is always an increase in the significance of objects, those things we can touch and hold. I'll say that again. When human populations are in mourning, transition, displacement, or dislocation, the significance of physical things always rises. So, shall we do honour to our physical existence for a moment? I invite you to tear your gaze away from the screen and look around the room, the living space that you're in at home or wherever you are tonight, and just notice any objects that are significant to you. In fact, notice how many meaningful objects there may be around you. Things that hold meaning beyond themselves, things that bring up memories, things that connect you with people. Things you could tell a story about. Many of us build what someone has called mini cosmologies, our own little universes in our homes. The things we put around us tell of our vision for how the world should be. Does that ring true for you? Do you think there's any truth in that for you? If you wish, just pick one of your nearby significant things and hold it, touch it, show it on your screen if you wish. I've got this wee olive cross. It was made out in the Palestinian territories and it was given to me by a friend. So if there's something you wish to show, you can. But while you're still just touching that with one hand, can I invite you to just put your other hand on your heart for a moment, really firmly. You feel that touch and just take a deep breath. Thanks be to God for all that carries meaning and memory. Thanks be to God for our breath and our bodies. Our worship needs more sacramentality in the widest sense, to use what is physical to carry meaning, to let us enact our prayer and devotion in far more ways than spoken words, to let us move and do and touch. So it's time for us all to move and breathe for a wee 5-minute break now. Get your bodies away from these screens, have a breather, and we'll regroup in about 5 minutes. See you soon. The next presentation I'm going to show you is a cluster of examples of visual art in worship. These are all just from previous projects and liturgies that I've been involved with. in recent years. Not all of them had an eco theme, but I've included them here because the art form is easily transferable to eco themes. And I made these particular choices based on simplicity of materials and simplicity of methods. So if there's any well-qualified liturgical artists among you, then you'll have seen all this kind of stuff before and you'll be way ahead of it. But I tend to find in church circles that there's more people who, when it comes to kind of visual art things, are a little bit scared by the whole world of being a bit hands-on and creative. So this is the can-do approach to things. I hope that's my intention. So let's see where we go with some creative worship examples. Creative worship. Let trees be your teachers. That's always a good way to go. The first few examples are about using words. Our worship tends to be very wordy, overly wordy, but we can make our wordiness a bit more interesting. This is simply from young people going out in nature and coming back and writing some poetry. And again, this was about being with the trees. And this next one, I just find the most profound thing I've ever heard from a young girl who said this. What more can you add? We can also have some more colourful words. Recycled cardboard, get your old boxes out and look up the Psalms, just some lovely words. So these were done as part of a workshop, lots of different Psalm words, and they were just placed, just standing upright like that, right down the aisle in the worship space and clustered around the sanctuary. Another idea of doing things, this Celtic knot pattern, which symbolises both the eternity, the no ending, and also the sense of connection. So this knot pattern drawn on an old sheet, and the words here in this example were an exploration of creativity itself, but it could be done in response to any aspect of an environmental theme. Bringing the outdoors in, very simply, some colours and objects celebrating here the island environment on Iona itself, with all the greens and blues and beach finds. If you want to take your written things to another level, perhaps try setting up a scriptorium with lovely boards and ink and white gloves and the proper nibs, and just let people copy out scripture verses. This can be a surprisingly powerful experience. Or the good old promise box with collage coverings from magazines. This was an affirmation box made with young adults, and the scrolls inside were affirmative quotations, but it could be that you make scrolls with eco challenges or questions for discussion or facts about climate change. You could make small ones to give to each other and take out one a day, one a week. You could make a giant one and that the whole congregation could take things out and be challenged by them. A different way of sharing the peace, a paper communion cloth with a difference. These fringes were cut along the edges, and as you can see from the smaller photo, the preparatory one, that each fringed piece had a Bible quote hidden on its underside. So at the sharing of the piece, the pieces of the fringe were literally torn off and everybody got one. They were all handed around and everyone had a quotation to go away with. More about bringing the outdoors in, some weaving rings. You could do it during the act of worship or decoratively. Again, that one on the right is from Iona Abbey with the seashells hanging from it. Lots of different ways just to bring in natural objects and, you know, brighten up the worship space, get nature right in there. I added this one simply to show how the ring was made, just with some freshly cut thin branches twisted together, bind it up with some jute string or whatever you've got into the circle, and then use wool or more string to make your lattice, whether it goes one way or both ways, and then you're ready to weave whatever you wish to weave. And this can be small rings, enormous rings, done quite a few of them. Great fun and very simple. Another simple material, good old salt dough, very versatile in lots of ways. The simple symbol cutouts there was hand shapes here, and using those very earthy materials of flour, salt and water. And they were decorated during the act of worship by giving out these little pots with the pens and wool and ribbon that could be written on. This particular occasion was in the context of an international women's conference, and so the written part was to put in our own names and a wee greeting if you wanted, and your country name. And at the end of the conference, everyone was invited to take home one that was made by someone else, so you could keep praying for one of the companions you had met. But lots of ways you could use that idea. And don't forget good old bunting. These pictures were from a festival weekend and a communion service on the theme of home and welcome, a welcome home. And so the invitation was to use these scraps, again, of recycled fabric, to write words of welcome. And this was a very popular all-age activity and made the worship itself very active and very colourful in the end too. Very simply done, just pegging up on lines. And you could use that in lots of ways. I added this one in, again, it's bunting, very simple paper heart-shaped bunting, just to show how you can simply transform the look of a space just with some repeated shapes. And I've found artistically that if you limit the number of colours that you use, that really works well. That makes it more striking. Simply the purples, greens and cream, or whatever your choice might be. And another one, this was for Palm Sunday, with the deliberate setting side by side of the triangular shapes cut from newspaper, symbolising politics and current events, and putting that right in the midst with the palm leaves and the greenery and the celebration of God's presence. Some canvas boards made for harvest. Again, just showing the simplicity of words, and here with some leaf print patterns on them, and just a way of playing with words, you know, different angles, or making them look like they're kind of falling off the edge of the board, and also just the power of repetition. Justice, justice, justice. Some more leaf prints here, another cloth on the go that was used in the centerpiece of worship. And just to use patterns made with the kind of dyes that you find in berries and leaves and grasses, but also to use, again, the materials of the earth, clay, chalk and charcoal, to use them just to make prayerful patterns as a way of meditating, a way of expressing a prayer that is not with words, but just using your hands to create patterns, whatever it might be, making your mark. Very powerful. Or as we've said, go outside, go and do it outside. This was a nature pathway made outside the building, just very simply with stones and sand and shells. What might be the meaning of creating the pathway. What might it symbolize? The pathway to where we want to go. What might be the meaning of inviting people to walk on such a pathway? What might their prayer be? Or out in the wilds on a beach, and this is a labyrinth. You can make labyrinths in lots of places, on the grass, on sand, on concrete, on whatever you've got. But again, taking something outside, or there a big seaweed Celtic cross to stand around and worship in the wild. So that's a galloping tour through just some examples there. And finally, if you want further visual art inspiration, I cannot recommend highly enough my friend and frequent partner in this kind of work, Carol Marples, who is part of Soul Marks. And do look up their website. Lots of ideas and gallery pictures of what she's done. And she's got a wonderful installation. The backstory of it is called 7 Days, and it's for COP26. And she'll be putting it up in the chaplaincy of Glasgow University next Friday. So do look up the pictures on that if you want more on the visual art side of things. So friends, we are almost ready for another breakout room for you to go and do some work. Liturgy means the work of the people. So we're going to send you back into rooms with some designated tasks. I'm just going to bring up another slide to show you the tasks. Here we go. Now, I don't think you'll have, it doesn't matter if you've remembered your breakout room number or not, 'cause it's going to be different. If you end up in room 1, you're going to be doing rewilding worship. So the task is just to play with some of these possibilities around symbol and colors and different materials, movement, you know, questions, sacramental moments or silence, and just see if you can devise one simple element, just something that could be part of a worship service that's just a bit more creative and touches on these environmental themes. So if you're in room 1, you're going to be doing rewilding worship. So thinking about how do we rediscover an untamed God. Room 2, something that expresses our lament for God's broken dreams. How do we own our failure and sorrow at the reality we're in? Room 3, you're going to be the stubborn optimists, that other side of the prophetic tasks, envisaging the better and very possible future. How could you encapsulate that in some action or visual or something we could do in worship? Room 4, you're going to think about the uprooting, not of invasive species, but invasive habits. The things that get in the way that we need to relinquish and change, and the struggle to change. And room 5 are going to be thinking about paying attention, both the urgency, the pay attention, but the paying attention, considering the lilies. So considering the lilies in apocalyptic times. So those are your 5 themes. We'll try to put this in the broadcast of the rooms if we can, to remind you of what you're doing. Okay, so just coming up with something short, just a wee element of worship that could express the rewilding worship, the lament, being a stubborn optimist, uprooting the bad habits, or paying attention, considering the lilies in apocalyptic times. And we're going to give you about 15, well, about 17 minutes. We'll see how we get on. Okay, welcome back everyone. Now you didn't have quite as long as we had hoped to give you for that task, but it would be really good to hear just a little nugget of feedback from each room, just to give us a wee 1 minute flavour of anything that you came up with, and maybe it's some things that you can chew on after tonight. So the rewilding worship folk, the room one, would anyone from room one like to unmute and just give us a tiniest little sense of what was the best bit of your sharing?
Outdoor services. Some of us have and some of us haven't. Daniel in our group, his church seems to do quite a lot. They're very near a farm. They work a lot with the travellers and they prefer to be outdoors rather than indoors. Eileen said about having the doors open during lockdown has been great because it has kept us more connected with what's happening outside. And she's had a cross outside her church that's had real plants growing up, which is really visually beautiful. And we're thinking about maybe trying to bring the outside in, and maybe with leaves and twigs, and especially with autumn, we could make it an autumn splendour inside the church, which would be quite amazing. So lots to think about.
Good. I like your autumn splendour and your open doors. Yeah, let that untamed God blow through in and out. Wonderful. Thank you. Wish we could hear more, but let's have a little bit from room two, the lamenters. Anything you came up with? What was the essence of your blether?
Oh, we were talking about lots of things. I don't know, not very much lamenting. No, we were talking about tears and that image of tears, and so we talked around maybe having paper tears where people could write what they're lamenting on, and we also talked about the power of water and the dualism that comes with water. We weren't quite getting to where we were going with that, but we were thinking maybe chaotic poems or something like that around people's idea about water and its destructive nature, but also its the opposites of that. And we were also thinking about ice and how you know, that if you froze a flower in a block of ice and suspended it, and through worship just heard that drip, 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 that would be quite a powerful image because the flower goes in and it looks beautiful, but actually at the end it's destroyed and it's limp and it's almost like tears dripping. And so we were kind of working around those kind of ideas of sorrow and trying to get away from a good old sing-song.
What a strong image there, almost like this weeping icy flower. Wow, lots of different things. Thank you very much. Room three, the stubborn optimist at the other end of the kind of emotional range here. What did you come up with?
Well, I was really glad to be a stubborn optimist.
Excellent, Rosie.
We're into growing, so we started off with John 12 and a seed falling into the ground and dying, and thought about planting a mixed pile of bulbs that give the congregation a choice of a bulb and some soil and a pot, but they don't actually know what they're getting. So they could plant a bulb and then it just is in soil, and then as they look after it, it will eventually germinate into a plant that they don't know what it's going to be. And also looking at putting labels of words of encouragement about creation and about the beauty of growth and new life and on the pot. And then we thought of, obviously we have the Bible reading, and we thought, you know, a prayer linked to creation.
Fantastic. I love that. Surprise bulbs and all kinds of things going on there. Stubborn optimism. Do keep your stubborn optimism alive, everyone. Thank you very much, Rosie. So what about the uprooters in room 4, uprooting our invasive habits and struggling with our need to change? Anyone there like to give us a wee word? Room 4. Who was in room 4?
Well, I'll say something, but we didn't decide. Perhaps the other groups decided. Yeah, we didn't go with the uprooting theme, which now you say it sounds rather good one. We were looking at waste. We thought waste was one of the habits that in all sorts of ways we really need to deal with. and we focused on the unrecyclable material, and we thought that you have a space in the worship where people could bring items, could be invited to bring them during the before the service, and then at a point in the service bring those up. One of our people was talking about how this had been done in a similar way with a broken tree from the garden in the church, and that had formed the basis for creating a tree onto which things were hung, and in this instance they'd be hung as unrecyclable materials. And then however we might do it, we're back to the lamenting idea a bit, that could lead into a time of reflection on our habits which are wasteful, and possibly we could have a tree with leaves which you could take away as either leaves with a blessing or promise on them, possibly a warning, you know, but some biblical words that would actually make you reflect on wastefulness.
Thank you.
They were not all our ideas, but they were hopefully representative, friends.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. Great reflavouring against some really strong images there that are wasteful habits, the link between those unrecyclables and then leading into possibly lament and the leaves, but the blessing and warning. Yeah, a lot of different things and different ways you could make that very powerful and real. Thank you. And finally, considering the lilies in apocalyptic times, those who are paying attention in room 5, what did you come up with? A wee word. Who's in room 5?
Shall I speak? It's my fault, so I'll speak. We considered the image of the lilies in apocalyptic times as a symbol of hope, and we talked about hope at first, and how that image of I can't remember the young lady who suggested it, but it was a case of more people are joining in the conversation, more action is taking part. Then we talked on the flip side of how that isn't possible for a lot of people, especially living in poverty, relying on food banks, and that they can't take part in more environmental things. They can't eat more healthily because of its survival. It's apocalyptic in some respects to them because they're so poor. So the idea was to combine the two, and it was suggested that we have a harvest every week. To raise a number of issues, really. One, to raise the issue of over-reliance on food banks for people when they shouldn't have to rely on food bank. Two, to show the dangers of global farming, and to show people, especially the younger people, how seasonal farming used to be, and different foods were grown at different times and harvested, and also and to show the hope as well. And also just to raise awareness of the creation and keep creation on everybody's minds, you know, every week, that they're bringing these foods in, not only to help people who are less fortunate, but to just keep the message of creation constantly moving forward.
Thank you. Some strong stuff there. The weekly harvest, really keeping it up on our radar. I just want to leave you with a wee thing about harvest. I remember doing a project with a school for harvest many years ago now, and they wanted something different, to not just bring their tins of baked beans to the church again. And we raised the question, what is the harvest that the earth needs from us? What's the harvest that the earth needs from us? And it just seems to be one of those questions that sort of came out of that project and became our kind of mantra for it, and it's stuck with me. So there's one for conversation. Another question: what's the harvest that the earth needs from us? Friends, I am very aware of the time now. We've gone over, so I'd like to move to our closing responses. Another just wee short act of prayer. I had hoped to leave room for questions and answers if you wanted to throw anything back at me, but what I am going to do is just put my very simple email address in the chat there, joe@iona.org.uk. If there's anything you want to fire back at me, any feedback, questions, whatever, you're very welcome to do so. Our closing prayer is divided up into 4 voices, A, B, C, and D. So I'm going to ask for some volunteers, please. If you'd can just hear some different voices as we close our time. So in no particular order, I'm looking at my screen. Alison McQueen, would you be willing to unmute and be part A? Is that okay?
Sure, no problem.
Pauline, Whatsby, could you be part B? You happy with that? Thanks, Pauline. Judith, could you be part C? You okay with that? Unmute yourself. Thank you. That's great. And Pam, could you be part D? Thank you very much. And so we pray.
God the maker of sound and colour, texture, movement, and the ceaseless beauty in living things. We bless you.
God the maker of granite and mustard seed, of grey cloud and starlight, of earthquake and heartbeat. We
bless you.
God the maker of all that is unseen, of all that has been, of all that words could never capture. We bless you.
We bless you.
God our maker, we, the children of your love, the beneficiaries of your kindness, the guardians of your creation, bless you.
We bless you for your making, your trusting, your loving, your never-ending goodness, tonight and always. Amen.
Thank you to you all for your participation, for coming along, for sharing, for your creativity and inspiration in the things that you've shared, both in your groups, but also in that last session. It's fantastic, it's amazing. And of course, a huge thanks, Joe. It's been a privilege to share this evening with you and to be inspired by your works and your words. So thank you very much. We'll give you a big round of applause.
And thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for all the technical support from Jason. Thank you so much, and to Judy for the invitation, and Eileen just for being part of the organisation of tonight. It's been great to be with you. I hope there's been something of value and worth. Keep going, keep making your worship creative, keep doing honour to this beautiful world that's out there, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Good night and God bless.
Bye.